Thanks a lot. All right. Now, I suppose I can start. Before I dive deeper and present my own experience, I'd like to explain the way that has led me to this particular point of interest. 3 events in my life has led to me staying on this stage right now. The first one is that I've studied interface design in Fachhochschule Potsdam, or University of Applied Science at Potsdam. And one of the focus of my studying was how exactly the information and data set that change over time and has its own dynamic can be visualized. The second one is my work at LucasFonts, and there I work as designer and web developer. This is a company with not only a precise focus on the aesthetical part of font development and font design, but also on the technical one. The third one is that actually during my spare time I participate in indie video game jams. And these all gave me an opportunity to look at the font development process for a video game environment through the lenses of interface designer and self-educated web developer. As I've said, I participated in indie video game jams, and I was quite surprised when I figured out not that much information can be found about typography in video games, especially in comparison with the amount of material that was written for print and web design. Here is a quote from a book by Toshi Omagari, Arcade Game Typography. And I really recommend you to pay attention to this book and read it if you're interested in this topic. Indeed, whenever font is mentioned, we usually think about print or web design. And typography in video games usually not a part of this discussion. However, video games environment offer new interesting challenges for type designers and game designers. Among them could be anything from creating a suitable font for each particular game world to preparing a font for rendering on the 3D surfaces with the perspective distortion. Today I'm going to speak about video games. I'll show some principles of how text can be used within the video game environment. I'll speak about challenges that type designers and game designers face, and in the end I'll share my own experience in creating a font for a video game. Video games communicate through text. The most obvious examples could be dialog boxes, or interfaces, or different descriptions. Of course, menus and scores. Some games, and we already see this example yesterday, where the text itself can be an interactive element. And this textual expression of a game relies a lot on the uniqueness of the game world. And at the same time, like technical limitations, they shape the form in which this font can works within the video game environment. And to introduce the field, I'd like to show some games. I've separated them into 3 groups. The first one is text within a head-up display. The second one, text on the textures in a 3D game environment. And the third one, text as a part of a game. Head-up display. In video gaming, head-up display is like additional layer or additional surface that separate additional layer between a player and a video game environment, where all the information about a player can appear. And this term was taken from the modern aircraft. And here on the screen you can see exactly a real photo that was made inside a plane. A head-up display usually shows information about something like score or game levels or life indicators or dialog boxes. And here the first example, The Legend of Zelda, which was developed and created by Nintendo in 1986. And both the dialog boxes and the head-up display is set in bitmap monospace font, which perfectly suit to the game design. Or Pac-Man, another game, another classic. And here, player navigating Pac-Man with a joystick in order to eat all the dots and escape all the ghosts. The score is set in bitmap monospace font, and the typography is basic, which also could be because of the technical limitations and the screen resolution. Oh, Super Street Fighter. Yes, here we can see the life indicators and some additional comments. Oh, the stillness of the wind, where the interface, the menus appear as an additional layer. Of course, not all the games have head-up display or dialog boxes, and one of the examples is a game Another World, and this is one of the first cinematic platformers. It was created and developed in 1991. It was developed by Eric Chailly in a period over 2 years, and he created this game alone. And player is exploring the game and is being navigated through the game just with the surrounding of the game. And this slowly moved us to the second group of games, namely texts, which appears on the textures in a 3D environment. And textures, this is image, image file, and here on the left you can see that a plain image is transforming into a 3D object, which means that this plain image can be mapped to the graphical model of the three-dimensional world of a video game. And on the right you see user interface of one of the most popular game engines, Unreal, and you can see how user is applying different textures to different surfaces within a game. And probably the most the most obvious examples among this group of games are first-personal explorers and first-personal shooters. And the first one, The Fall of Lazarus, is the first-personal explorer game. And here you can pay attention on how text is transforms while the camera is moving. All the first-person shooters, and I try to choose the less violent example. However, you can see when the player is turning around that the form of the letters changes. The third group of games is font as a part of a game, and among them I like to present VIP Ribbon. It's a Sony Entertainment rhythm game, and the player is follow the main character vibrate along a straight line, and sometimes some obstacles appear, and these obstacles they correspond to the rhythm of music which plays on the CD, and the behaves similarly to the entire graphic. Or what remains of Edith Finch, where you can interact with the text. Or Baba Is You, where like block of text is actually an interactive element of the game itself. Of course, the question is, what should we think about when we're trying to choose or create a font for a video game? And to list these challenges, I relied not only on my experience, but I've also spoken to game developers and game designers during video game meetups in Berlin. And the first one, it's like absolute winner, is the problem of choice. Everybody told me that there are too many fonts, and there is like a lack of platforms and websites or collections of fonts where you have a filter system that will help you to choose a right font for your video game. And of course, this is incredibly important because the aesthetic of the font should be the same as an aesthetic of a game. And it could be anything, like a spaceship or a medieval town or a fantasy world. The second one, and it's probably a more technical problem, the challenge of language support or localization. And this is also a pretty common situation when game developers and game designers combine different fonts in order to support all the languages and to translate the game into different languages. Usability also plays a huge role, especially when the player is being navigating through the game with the help of a text. And here's probably there's some examples of games where not only different styles of one font appear on one screen, but different styles of different fonts mixed with each other. And it's really important to have like font consistency within the whole game. Also, pretty often the background of the game changes and transforms constantly, and it's important to think about the contrast between the text and the background. The fourth group of problems is font rendering and font interpreting. And if we look at this problem from the type design perspective, we can say that we have open type font format, and nowadays this is a standard font format. And this is great because it supports different script systems, it supports advanced typographic features, and we have variable fonts, and they probably one of the most like powerful tools, typographic tools that we have now. But OpenType font is in core a vector-based form, and it consists of curves, Bezier curves, and each curve is being calculated with a Bezier formula. And to render or re-render such forms within a complex and dynamic video game environment needs a lot of computation. And unfortunately, OpenType font format is not supported equally on the different platforms and in different software. For instance, current modern browsers can handle it, but when we speak about game engines, software where game designers and game developers create the games, For instance, Unity, one of the popular examples. Not all the OpenType fonts features are supported. Let's say there is a Text Mesh Pro module within Unity, and with the help of which you can change spacing, kerning, line height, bold and italic styles, capitalization. But there is no way to take out the information from the OpenType font about ligatures or contextual alternates or stylistic sets or positional forms. And of course, it has an impact on the microtypography and on the language support. About how if we speak about how text renders on the 3D surfaces, on the textures, I really recommend you to read this particular paper if you have interest in this topic. That was a paper written by Chris Green from Valve Corporation, and they designed and developed Team Fortress 2, and they exactly speak about the problem of text rendering on textures. And probably I'll explain it in a bit too simple way, but what they have done, they have analyzed each form of glyph and they calculated the distance between the black and white pixel. And they saved these values within a texture, within an image file. In a way, they have created a mathematical model out of the visual representation of each glyph. And after that, instead of re-rendering of one font within a video game environment, they recalculated it each time. Anyway, what I want to say with this example is that the video game environment is incredibly complex, and I believe that it needs custom type design solution as well. And this is the right point to share my own experience. I'd like to present game Moji. That's a quite simple game, and at the same time it's a great simple example to show how a font can be integrated within a video game. It was created within 3 days during the first version of the game was created within 3 days during low resolution game jam. And the rules of this game jam was to make a game within a screen with a resolution 64 by 64 pixels, not that much. And in a game you play a little yellow alien and who's being followed by purple monster, and the goal of the game is to pass as many screens as possible while the speed of a monster progressively increases. And this is how all the graphics looked from the very beginning. The typography was pretty basic, just press to play and figures for a score. And later we decided that we need font to write some other text besides that. And I created a font based on the design of the first letters. And the font was created in Photoshop. And I'm pretty sure that Photoshop is not a common software for type designers. But there was a reason. We created this game from scratch. It was programmed from scratch. There was no game engine where you can take an OpenType or TrueType font and upload it. And I draw the font in Photoshop, and I use slices in order to export each glyph as a separate PNG file. And every glyph has a name. It's a Unicode, it's a name of a glyph, and ligatures, it's a combination of different Unicodes separated with underscore. After that, all these tiny PNGs were collected into one image, and this image has a name sprite. In our case, it was PNG sprite, and each glyph has an information about the width and height and the coordinates on this texture. And as I've mentioned, there was no graphical user interface, and like our design tool was actually text editor. As I've mentioned, the rules of the game was game jam was to create a game within a 64 by 64 pixel screen, and like spacing, of course, played a huge role. And we decided that there would be 0 pixel on the left side and 1 pixel on the right. After that, I've defined kerning classes and kerning with some kerning exceptions and ligatures. And they also it was not only it was made not only because we were like care about the beautiful rhythm, but it also saved us a couple of pixels on the screen, which were very valuable. The result looks like this. Also later I created a Cyrillic part of the font, and I wonder if we have enough pixels on the screen for all Cyrillic letters. Both the game and the font are open source, and you're very welcome to contribute to these projects. This game, this font can be rendered as a 3D font as well, and it been used in another game, Rubik's Cube. To conclude, I have the feeling that there is a lack of information about this topic, and probably a lack of researchers among type designers and graphic designers. And of course, this is like a complex field because of a great amount of array platforms and technological specifications. And what I want to say is, let's communicate. Let's try to solve this problem together, like game designers and type designers. Thank you so much.